In the dense forest surrounding an isolated mansion, a young woman runs desperately carrying her 5-year-old daughter in her arms. Their faces show marks of suffering that tell a story of terror. Exhausted, she stumbles and leans against a tree, her labored breathing mixing with her daughter's sobs. Suddenly, her strength gives out and she faints, still embracing the child who cries for her mother. Months before, she had accepted the invitation of the richest man in the region to live in his mansion, believing she had found safety for herself and her daughter. But what seemed like a fairy tale turned into a nightmare when his true nature was revealed. Now, wounded and lost in the forest, she fights for her life while being pursued by the man who swore to love her. What she doesn't know is that a majestic white horse observes everything, and what this animal does to protect them will challenge everything you believe to be possible. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thank you. Now let's get back to our story. The silence of the woods was shattered by a low, desperate moan. Amidst the dense shadows of ancient oaks, 2 figures lay entangled on the damp, leaf-covered ground. The young woman awoke slowly, feeling the familiar weight of her daughter in her arms. Marina's eyes fluttered open, blinking against the golden light filtering through the canopy. The face of Sophia, her 5-year-old, was stained with dried tears and dirt. For a terrible moment, Marina couldn't remember where she was. Her mind seemed shrouded in fog, as if trying to protect her from memories too painful to confront. Then, like waves crashing against rocks, it all came flooding back. The estate, the screams, the despair, the frantic race through the dark night. Marina tried to sit up, but a spasm of pain shot through her ribs. She looked down and saw the purplish bruises that marked her arms like maps of her suffering. Mark told a story she preferred to forget, but that her body insisted on remembering. Her clothes were torn and dirty, evidence of their desperate flight through the dense undergrowth. Sophia still slept, her small chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had dominated their lives. In recent weeks, Marina gently stroked her daughter's brown hair, removing leaves and small twigs that had become entangled in the silky strands. How had it come to this? How had she allowed her life to turn into a nightmare from which she now had to flee like a criminal? A soft sound of approaching footsteps made Marina freeze. Her heart pounded and she hugged Sophia tighter, preparing to run again, even though her legs trembled with exhaustion. But when she looked in the direction of the noise, her eyes widened in surprise. A magnificent white horse emerged from the trees, moving with an almost ethereal grace. Its coat gleamed like pearls in the morning sun, and its dark eyes seemed to convey a deep intelligence and a kindness Marina hadn't seen in a long time. The animal stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as if assessing the situation. Marina held her breath. She had seen this horse before, grazing in the fields near the estate, where she had been a prisoner of her own naivety. She had always watched it from her bedroom window, envying its freedom, dreaming of being able to run free like it through the open fields. Now, somehow impossibly, it was here, as if it had come looking for them. The horse took a cautious step towards them, and Marina realized there was no fear in its eyes, only gentle curiosity. It lowered its muzzle and sniffed the air softly, as if trying to understand their plight. It was as if the animal could sense the suffering emanating from them, the pain that permeated every fiber of their beings. Sophia stirred in her mother's arms, murmuring something unintelligible before opening her large brown eyes. When she saw the horse, instead of showing fear, she smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a small, hesitant smile, but it was as if the sun had broken through the darkest clouds. "Mommy," Sophia whispered, her voice hoarse, "did the horse come to help us?" Marina felt tears burn her eyes. Her daughter's innocence, even after everything they had been through, could still find hope where she only saw despair. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe, somehow inexplicably, this magnificent horse had indeed come to help them. The animal seemed to understand the child's words, nodding its head gently before approaching even closer. Marina extended a trembling hand, and the horse allowed her to touch its velvety muzzle. The contact was like a balm to her wounded soul. But the peace of the moment was shattered by a distant sound that made Marina's blood run cold, men's voices echoing through the woods, drawing inexorably closer. The voices approached like an inevitable storm, and Marina felt the familiar panic rise in her throat. The white horse heard them too, its ears flicking alertly in the direction of the sounds. With a smooth but decisive movement, the animal positioned itself between them and the origin of the voices, like a silent guardian. Marina forced her mind to function beyond the fear. She needed to move, needed to protect Sophia, but where to go? The woods stretched in every direction, a green labyrinth that could be both salvation and perdition. She hugged her daughter tighter and whispered, "You need to be very quiet, my love. We're going to play hide and seek." Sophia nodded seriously, instinctively understanding this was no ordinary game. Her small hands clutched her mother's neck, and Marina could feel the child's racing heart beating against her chest. It was impossible not to remember how they had reached this desperate point. 3 months ago, Marina worked in the offices of Richard Morgan's agricultural company, the most influential man in the region. She was just another administrative assistant, struggling to make ends meet on her modest salary. Sophia stayed at the county daycare while she worked, and their evenings were filled with homework, baths, and bedtime stories. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. Richard had started to notice Marina differently after she had to work late on an urgent financial report. He appeared at her desk that night, offering coffee and praising her dedication. Marina was flattered by the attention, especially coming from such a respected man in the community. He was handsome, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in her life and in Sophia. The advances began subtly. Flowers on her desk, invitations to lunches he called work meetings. Expensive gifts he insisted were just tokens of appreciation for her good work. Marina resisted at first, aware of the difference in their positions, but Richard was persuasive and persistent. "A woman like you shouldn't have to worry about money," he had said on one of those occasions. "Sophia deserves the best, and I can provide that for both of you." The voices in the woods were closer now, and Marina could distinguish words. "Search near the creek," a male voice shouted. "She can't have gone far with the kid." The casual tone with which they spoke of their hunt made her shudder. To them, she was nothing more than a lost object that needed to be recovered. The white horse made a low sound, almost a whisper, and began to move slowly in the opposite direction of the voices. Marina understood immediately. The animal was offering an escape route. She rose with difficulty, her body protesting every movement, and began to follow the horse through the dense vegetation. As they walked silently, the memories continued to haunt Marina. The move to the estate had seemed like a dream come true at first. Sophia had her own room decorated like a fairy tale, with toys Marina could never have afforded. She herself was installed in the master bedroom next to Richard, who insisted it was only natural since they were a couple now. But the first warning signs appeared quickly. Richard didn't like it when she spoke to other employees. He monitored her phone calls, claiming concern for her safety. When Marina mentioned visiting her sister in another town, he created elaborate excuses as to why it wouldn't be possible. "Why would you need anyone else when you have everything here?" he would ask with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I take care of both of you. Isn't that enough?" The first time he raised his voice to her was when Marina questioned why she couldn't work anymore. "Women in your position don't need to work," he had said, his voice laced with a cold authority she had never seen before. "Your role now is to take care of our home and be grateful for the life I'm providing." Sophia stumbled on a root, and the small noise made Marina freeze. The voices seemed to have stopped too, as if they were listening. The white horse looked back, its eyes conveying urgency. They needed to keep moving, no matter how much it hurt. The white horse led them along an almost invisible trail, winding between ancient trees whose trunks were so wide that 3 people couldn't encircle them. Marina followed its steps, carrying Sophia, who had fallen asleep again in her mother's arms. The child's silence worried her more than any crying. Sophia had always been a talkative girl, full of questions about everything, but in recent weeks she had become increasingly quiet. The voices of their pursuers seemed to have faded, at least temporarily, but Marina knew she couldn't let her guard down. Richard had resources, influence, and determination. He wouldn't give up easily on what he considered his property. That word made her shudder whenever she remembered it. Property. That was how he had begun to treat her in the final weeks at the estate. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. After a month at the estate, Richard began to comment on Marina's clothes. "That blouse doesn't suit you," he would say, offering replacements that were always more conservative, covering more of her body. "A woman in your position needs to dress appropriately." Soon, a stylist appeared at the estate, bringing clothes Richard had personally chosen. They were expensive, elegant pieces, but Marina felt as if she were wearing a uniform, losing pieces of her identity with each change of outfit. When she tried to protest, Richard kissed her gently and murmured, "I want you to be perfect. It's for your own good." The isolation came disguised as protection. First, Richard suggested that Sophia no longer needed to attend the county daycare. "Why expose our girl to that environment when I can hire the best tutors?" he argued. Marina tried to explain that Sophia needed interaction with other children, but Richard had already made the decision. The tutor who arrived was a middle-aged, serious and efficient woman who treated Sophia more like an educational project than a child. Sophia's spontaneous laughter became rare, replaced by structured lessons and supervised activities. Marina watched her daughter slowly transform, losing the spontaneity that had always been her hallmark. The horse stopped suddenly, raising its head as if hearing something human ears couldn't catch. Marina followed its lead, sharpening her senses. For a moment, all she heard was the whisper of wind in the leaves. But then she realized the sound of the voices had changed direction. The pursuers were regrouping, likely following a different strategy. "They must have dogs," Marina whispered to herself, realizing the terrifying reality of her situation. How could she escape an organized search when she was injured, carrying a child, and lost in unfamiliar woods? Despair threatened to consume her, but she forced herself to keep walking. The memories continued to flow as she followed the horse. Richard's control over her communications had been another calculated step. First, he suggested she use a new phone, more secure and with better quality. Her old phone, where all the contacts from her previous life were stored, was dismissed as obsolete. Gradually, Marina realized her calls were being monitored. Conversations with her sister Claire became sparse and superficial, always with Richard nearby, making comments or suggesting she end the call. "You don't need to bother your family with trivial details," he would say. "They must have their own worries." The last conversation with Claire had been 3 weeks ago. Marina had tried to hint at her situation, but Richard remained by her side throughout the call, his intimidating presence silencing any attempt to ask for help. After she hung up, he held her face in his hands and said with a cold smile, "You don't need anyone but me. I'm your family now." The white horse stopped again, this time near a small creek. The water ran clear and cool, and Marina realized how thirsty she was. She gently woke Sophia. "You need to drink some water, my love." Sophia opened her eyes and looked around, disoriented. When she saw the creek, she whispered, "Can I drink, Mommy?" The question broke Marina's heart. Her daughter had learned to ask permission for everything, even to satisfy basic needs. While Sophia drank water from the creek with her small cupped hands, Marina took the opportunity to wash her face, trying to clean the marks of dirt and dried blood that stained her skin. The cold water brought momentary relief, but couldn't erase the memories that continued to torment her. The white horse remained vigilant, its ears constantly twitching, alert to any suspicious sound. The discovery that had changed everything had happened just a week ago. Marina was looking for a storybook for Sophia in Richard's office when she accidentally knocked over a poorly closed drawer. Papers scattered across the floor, and among them photographs that made her blood run cold. They were photos of different women, all young, all beautiful, all with expressions Marina recognized, the same lost look she saw in the mirror every morning. But what terrified her most were the letters. Handwritten letters in feminine script, begging to leave, asking to see family, expressing fear and despair. One letter in particular remained seared in her memory. "Please, Richard, I just want to see my mother one time. I promise I'll come back. I can't stand being here alone anymore. The walls feel like they're closing in on me." The letter was dated 2 years ago and signed by someone named Isabella. Marina had discreetly asked the older staff about Isabella, feigning casual curiosity. The answers were vague and uncomfortable. "Ah, Miss Isabella, she left a while ago," the cook had said, avoiding Marina's gaze. "Said she was going to travel abroad. Sudden thing." But Marina saw the lie in the woman's eyes. There was fear there. The same fear she was beginning to recognize in herself. How many women had passed through the estate? How many had disappeared without a trace? The question haunted her, especially since she couldn't find any record of these women on social media or anywhere online. Sophia finished drinking and snuggled back into her mother's arms. "Mommy, when are we going home?" she asked in her small voice. The question was like a stab to Marina's heart. They no longer had a home. The small apartment where they lived had been abandoned when they moved to the estate, and Richard had taken care of resolving the lease. "Soon, my love," Marina lied, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Soon, we'll be in a safe place." The white horse approached them, lowering its head as if to offer comfort. Marina reached out and stroked its neck, feeling the strength and calm emanating from the animal. It was as if it understood exactly what they were going through. The memory of the final confrontation with Richard still burned in her mind. She had tried to be careful, but he noticed her change in attitude. The night before their escape, he found her trying to hide some clothes and documents in a small suitcase. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice had been dangerously low, too controlled. Marina tried to invent an excuse about organizing clothes, but Richard was no fool. He had built an empire based on his ability to read people and situations. What followed was an explosion of rage Marina had never witnessed. Richard showed his true face for the first time without masks or pretense. He yelled about ingratitude, about how he had saved her and Sophia from poverty, about how she belonged to him now. "You're not going anywhere," he had roared, gripping her arms tightly enough to leave marks. "Neither you nor the girl. This is your home now, and I am your family. If you try to leave me, you'll find out what happens to ungrateful women like you." The threat in his words, combined with the photographs and letters she had found, was enough for Marina to realize that it wasn't just her freedom at stake. It was her life and, more importantly, Sophia's life. The sound of a branch snapping in the distance made all her memories vanish instantly. The horse raised its head sharply, and Marina felt her heart accelerate. The pursuers had found their trail again. The white horse began to move more quickly, and Marina understood the danger was too close for hesitation. She adjusted Sophia in her arms and followed the animal through denser vegetation, where low branches scratched her already injured skin. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, but the adrenaline of fear kept her moving. As they walked, Marina couldn't stop thinking about how naive she had been. The signs were all there, but Richard had been too skilled in his manipulation. He knew exactly the right words to say, the right gestures to make, like an experienced predator who had perfected his technique over the years. Richard's influence in the small, rural town extended far beyond his business. Marina had discovered this when she discreetly tried to seek help. The first person she approached was the school social worker where Sophia had briefly studied before being transferred to private tutoring. "Mrs. Morgan," the woman had said with a forced smile, assuming Marina had taken his name. "Mr. Morgan is one of our institution's main benefactors. I'm sure any misunderstanding can be resolved through dialogue." The social worker's eyes, however, conveyed a different message, a mixture of fear and resignation that Marina was beginning to recognize in many people in town. Her next attempt was with the local doctor when Marina took Sophia for a routine checkup. She tried to casually mention her concern about her daughter's increasingly withdrawn behavior, hoping the professional might offer some help or guidance. "Changes are always difficult for children," the doctor had replied evasively. "But Sophia is in excellent hands now. Mr. Morgan is a respectable man, and you two are very lucky." When Marina insisted that Sophia seemed scared at times, the doctor just prescribed vitamins and suggested more outdoor activities. The horse stopped abruptly, and Marina almost collided with it. The animal was tense, every fiber alert to something she couldn't yet perceive. Then she heard it, voices approaching from two different directions. They had split the search party, surrounding the area where they were. Sophia stirred in her mother's arms, waking with the sudden movement. Her large brown eyes looked around with an expression that broke Marina's heart. Not the normal fear of a child, but a premature resignation, as if she had already learned that the world was a dangerous place where bad things happened without warning. "Mommy," Sophia whispered, "are they going to take us back?" The simple question carried so much weight that Marina needed a moment to find her voice. "No, my daughter, we're never going back there." It was a promise she didn't know how to keep, but she made it anyway because some promises need to be made, regardless of our ability to fulfill them. The white horse made a subtle movement with its head, indicating a direction that seemed to lead even deeper into the woods. Marina hesitated for a moment. Moving further away from civilization seemed counterproductive, but the animal had shown inexplicable wisdom so far. As they followed the new route, Marina remembered her last attempt to seek help. It had been with Father Michael, from the church she occasionally attended before moving to the estate. She had hoped to find in the man of God the compassion and protection she hadn't found elsewhere. "My child," the priest had said with a paternal smile, "marriage is a sacred institution that requires patience and understanding from both parties. Richard is a man of faith, one of the pillars of our community. Perhaps you need to reflect on your own attitudes and find ways to be a better companion." The response had been like a punch to the gut. Even there, in the place that should represent refuge and protection, Richard's influence was felt. Or perhaps it was simply a reflection of a society that still viewed women as their husband's property, where a wealthy man's word was worth more than a woman's silent suffering. The voices were closer now, and Marina could distinguish the words, "Check near the water. Women with children always look for water." The coldness with which they spoke about her as if she were a hunted, wounded animal intensified her determination. The white horse led them through a narrow passage between two enormous rocks, a path that seemed known only to it. Marina had to stoop to pass, protecting Sophia from branches that stretched out like gnarled fingers trying to grab them. On the other side, they found themselves in a small, circular clearing, surrounded by trees so tall their canopies seemed to touch the sky. The silence here was different, not oppressive like at the estate, but comforting, like an invisible embrace from nature. Sophia lifted her head and murmured, "It's pretty here, Mommy." They were the first spontaneous words Marina had heard from her daughter in days, and she had to blink back tears. The horse moved to the center of the clearing and stopped, as if it knew this was a safe place to rest. Marina sat on a fallen log, still holding Sophia, and finally allowed her mind to process the magnitude of their situation. They were alone, injured, lost in a forest, being pursued by men determined to take them back to a nightmare. The decision to flee had been made the previous night, when Marina finally understood there was no more time for elaborate plans. Richard had returned from a business trip earlier than expected and found her trying to make a phone call, hidden in the estate's basement. "Who are you talking to?" His voice had cut the air like a knife. Marina hung up quickly, but it was too late. He had seen the number on the screen. It was the sheriff's office in a neighboring county where she had called, hoping to find someone not under Richard's influence. What followed was an explosion of violence Marina would never forget. Richard wasn't just controlling, he was dangerous in a way she hadn't fully understood until that moment. His fists found her body with calculated precision, avoiding visible areas, but causing enough pain to send a clear message. "You're mine," he had hissed through clenched teeth. "If you try to leave me again, it'll be the last thing you do. And the girl—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the implied threat was enough to make Marina's blood run cold. Sophia had woken up to the sounds of the argument and appeared at the top of the stairs, her small bare feet on the cold marble. When she saw Marina on the floor, with Richard standing over her, the child began to cry silently. Not the loud, desperate crying natural in children, but silent tears showing she had already learned that making noise could make things worse. It was in that moment Marina made her final decision. It didn't matter what happened to her, but Sophia would not grow up in that environment. Her daughter would not learn that love meant fear, that protection came with control, that being a woman meant being someone's property. During the early hours of the morning, while Richard slept soundly after what he had called a necessary conversation, Marina gathered the courage to execute her desperate plan. She knew the guards' routines, knew where the cameras were positioned, had memorized the property's blind spots during her long, solitary walks through the gardens. The white horse lowered its head and nuzzled Sophia gently, who reached out her small hand to touch the animal's muzzle. "He's our friend, isn't he, Mommy?" she asked, with an innocence that contrasted brutally with everything they had been through. "Yes, my love," Marina replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "He came to help us when we needed him most." The pursuers' voices seemed to have faded, at least temporarily, but Marina knew it was only a matter of time before they expanded their search to this area. Richard wouldn't give up easily. He had invested too much time and energy in molding her to his will, and men like him didn't accept losing what they considered their possessions. She thought of her sister Claire, who lived 2 towns over. If they could reach her, perhaps there was a chance. Claire had always been the stronger of the two, the one who questioned authority and didn't let herself be intimidated. But how to get there without money, without transportation, with a small child and men searching for them? The horse raised, its head suddenly looking in the direction they had come from. Its ears were on high alert, and Marina felt her stomach clench. They were coming. The sound of footsteps approaching the clearing made Marina prepare to run again, but the white horse did something unexpected. Instead of indicating an escape route, it moved deliberately towards the noise, positioning itself like a protective shield between them and the intruders. Marina held Sophia tighter, bracing for the worst, but The figure that emerged from the trees was not one of Richard's security men. It was a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail and practical hiking clothes. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Marina and Sophia, her eyes immediately registering the visible bruises on the young mother's face. "My God!" the woman murmured, approaching slowly with her hands visible, as if understanding any sudden movement could further frighten them. "You're hurt. Do you need help?" Marina hesitated, years of conditioning making her question if this was another of Richard's traps. But there was something in the woman's voice, a genuine concern she hadn't heard in a long time. Besides, the white horse showed no signs of alarm. On the contrary, it seemed to recognize the newcomer. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Hayes," the woman introduced herself gently. "I'm a veterinarian and I was looking for this horse. He belongs to the property where I work, but he ran off a few weeks ago." She looked at the animal fondly. "I never imagined I'd find him protecting two people in need." The veterinarian's words hit Marina like a thunderbolt. "A few weeks," she repeated hoarsely. "He ran off a few weeks ago." Evelyn nodded, approaching closer. "Yes, shortly after the rumors started in town about..." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "About Mr. Morgan and his new companion. People said something wasn't right, but no one dared speak openly." Marina felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "People knew?" "Some of us suspected," Evelyn admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. "Especially after what happened with Isabella, and before her, with Carmen. But Richard Morgan is very powerful, and the evidence always disappeared. The women just vanished, and the official story was always the same. They had decided to start a new life elsewhere." Sophia stirred in Marina's arms, looking at Evelyn with cautious curiosity. The veterinarian smiled gently at the child. "Hello, little one. What's your name?" "Sophia," the girl whispered, hiding her face in her mother's neck. Evelyn nodded understandingly. "Sophia is a beautiful name. It means wisdom." She looked back at Marina. "You're being searched for, aren't you? I heard voices in the woods, men shouting orders." Marina nodded, feeling tears burn her eyes. Finally, after so long, someone who understood, someone who didn't judge her or send her back to the hell she had fled. "How long has this been going on?" Evelyn asked softly. "Months," Marina managed to say, "but it got much worse in the last few weeks. Last night he..." Her voice failed as she remembered the violence. Evelyn drew closer, and Marina could see the determination in her eyes. "Listen, there's something you need to know. I'm not just a veterinarian. I'm also a volunteer counselor at a shelter for women experiencing domestic violence in a town about 30 miles from here. I have contacts, resources, ways to help you disappear for real, legally." The words seemed too good to be true. Marina had given up hoping for genuine help. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because I've seen this pattern before," Evelyn replied firmly. "And because this horse," she stroked the animal's neck, "has an extraordinary instinct for finding people who need protection. 3 times in the last 5 years, he's disappeared from the farm where I work, and 3 times he's been found protecting someone in danger." The white horse nodded as if in agreement, and Sophia laughed softly, the first genuine sound of joy Marina had heard from her daughter in weeks. "But the men looking for us," Marina began. "I know these woods better than any of them," Evelyn interrupted, "and I have something they don't, a real plan to get you out of here safely." For the first time in months, Marina felt something. She had almost forgotten hope. Evelyn knelt beside Marina, examining her injuries with a professional eye. "These bruises need medical attention," she said in a worried voice. "But first, we need to get you out of immediate danger." She opened a backpack she was carrying and took out a small first aid kit. "I always carry this with me when I come to the woods." While Evelyn gently cleaned a cut on Marina's arm, she explained her plan. My truck is parked on the main trail, about a mile from here. The problem is, Richard's men are probably watching all the obvious exits from the woods. She paused thoughtfully. But I know an alternate route through the densest part of the woods. It's tougher, but it will lead us directly to a secondary road where I have a friend waiting. Sophia watched Evelyn work, fascinated by the gentleness in the woman's movements. Do you hurt the animals? She asked with a child's typical curiosity. No, dear. Evelyn smiled warmly. I help animals when they're sick or hurt, just like I'm helping your mummy now. She looked at Marina. She's very smart. You're both stronger than you realize. The words touched something deep in Marina. It had been so long since anyone had called her strong. Richard spent his days reminding her how weak and dependent she was, how she couldn't survive without him. Hearing the opposite from someone who barely knew her was like a balm to her wounded soul. The white horse, which had remained vigilant, throughout the conversation suddenly lifted its head and walked to the edge of the clearing. Its ears were alert, and it let out a low nicker that clearly signified danger. They're approaching again, Evelyn murmured, quickly packing away her medical supplies. We need to move now. She looked at the horse with reverence. Zeus always warns us when danger is near. Zeus? Marina asked as she struggled to her feet. That's what we call him at the farm where I work, Evelyn explained, already moving towards the denser vegetation. The farm owner, Mr. Thompson, found him years ago, injured and abandoned. Since then, Zeus seems to have developed a special instinct for protecting the vulnerable. They began to move through the woods, following Evelyn along a path that seemed to exist only in her memory. Marina carried Sophia, who had become silent again, but now her silence seemed more alert than resigned. Evelyn's presence had changed something fundamental in the dynamic. For the first time, they weren't just fleeing. They were following a plan. How did you know about me? Marina asked in a low voice as they walked. About Richard. And what? He does. Evelyn sighed deeply before answering. I've worked at Mr. Thompson's farm for 15 years. He's a good man who always suspected Richard's activities but could never get concrete proof. When Zeus started running away systematically, always in the direction of Richard's property, we started connecting the dots. She paused for a moment, checking if they were being followed. The first time was with Carmen 3 years ago. Zeus disappeared for a week and was found in an area near Richard's estate. When he came back, he brought with him a bloody woman's bracelet we could never identify. Marina shivered. The story echoed disturbingly with her own experience. The second time was with Isabella, Evelyn continued. Zeus brought back a piece of fabric that looked like it was from a dress. When we tried to investigate discreetly, we found out Isabella had traveled abroad suddenly, according to Richard. But you never did anything? Marina asked, trying not to sound accusatory. We tried, Evelyn replied, her voice heavy with regret. But Richard is very clever. He always has perfect alibis, documents proving his versions, witnesses confirming his stories, and his influence in the region is immense. Zeus stopped again, this time indicating a change of direction. Evelyn followed his lead without question, showing complete trust in the animal's instinct. The trail Evelyn led them on seemed impossible for untrained eyes to perceive, winding between moss-covered rocks and fallen trees that formed natural obstacles. Marina began to understand why the pursuers hadn't found them yet. This part of the woods was a labyrinth that only someone with years of experience could navigate. Sophia had fallen asleep again in her mother's arms, exhausted by the constant tension of the past few days. Marina was grateful for her daughter's rest, but worried about the child's increasing silence. Before they moved to the estate, Sophia was a tireless chatterbox, always asking questions and telling imaginary stories. Now she spoke only when necessary, as if she had learned her voice could bring trouble. "She'll recover," Evelyn said softly, noticing Marina's concern. "Children are more resilient than we imagine, but they also need time to process trauma. At the shelter where I work, I see it constantly." "You really work at a shelter?" Marina asked, still hesitant to fully believe the help she was receiving. "Hope Haven," Evelyn replied, pride in her voice. "It started as a small project 10 years ago. But now we serve women from all over the region. We have psychologists, volunteer lawyers, job reintegration programs." She looked at Marina kindly. "And we have experience with cases like yours." Zeus stopped suddenly, his ears twitching nervously. He looked back in the direction they had come from and let out a low whicker. Evelyn immediately gestured for them to stop, and they all stood motionless for several tense minutes. In the silence, Marina could hear distant voices, but couldn't distinguish words. There were at least 3 men, maybe more, and they seemed to be arguing about directions. The sound gradually faded, and Evelyn signaled it was safe to continue. "They're searching systematically," Evelyn murmured, "but they're following the obvious trails. Our path will take us out of their search area." As they continued walking, Evelyn began to tell her more about the work she did. "You know, when I started at the shelter, I thought it would just be weekend volunteer work, but I quickly realized I was dealing with something much bigger, a network of silence and complicity that allows men like Richard to operate freely." Marina listened to every word, feeling less alone with each revelation. "How do you manage to help women escape this network?" "Patience, planning, and a lot of discretion," Evelyn explained. "We have partnerships with shelters in other cities, lawyers specializing in domestic violence, and a network of families offering temporary homes. The most important thing is to break the isolation that men like Richard impose on their victims." The mention of isolation touched a raw nerve in Marina. "He made me believe no one cared about me, that my family had forgotten me." "That's part of the strategy," Evelyn said sadly. "They systematically cut off all the victim's external connections, making her believe she only has them in the world. It's a cruel form of psychological control." Zeus led them through an even narrower passage between 2 enormous boulders that looked as if they had been placed there by ancient giants. On the other side, the landscape changed slightly. The trees were smaller, more spaced out, and Marina could see rays of sunlight filtering through the leaves. "We're almost at the road," Evelyn announced with relief. "My friend Carl should be waiting in his truck. He's a trustworthy man, has worked with us for years." "What if it's a trap?" Marina asked, her paranoia speaking louder. "What if Richard found out about you?" Evelyn stopped and looked directly into Marina's eyes. "I understand your mistrust. After everything you've been through, it's natural to question everything and everyone. But you need to start trusting again at some point. And Zeus would never lead us into danger. He has an infallible instinct for these things." As if understanding he was being mentioned, Zeus approached Marina and Sophia, gently nuzzling the woman's arm. The simple gesture conveyed more comfort than 1,000 words could express. The sound of an engine purring softly reached their ears before they could see the road. Zeus quickened his pace, showing recognition, and Evelyn smiled with relief. "That's Carl," she whispered. "We can hear his truck." When they finally emerged from the woods, Marina saw a narrow dirt road where a faded blue pickup truck was parked. A gray-haired man with a kind face got out of the vehicle as soon as he saw them, hurrying towards them with a worried expression. "Evelyn, thank God," he said, briefly hugging the veterinarian. "When you didn't come back on time, I started to worry." His eyes turned to Marina and Sophia with immediate compassion. "Are these the 2 who need our help?" "Carl, this is Marina. And her daughter Sophia." Evelyn made the introductions quickly. "Marina, Carl runs Hope Haven's Safe Transport program. He's helped dozens of women reach the shelter safely." Carl knelt to Sophia's height, who was awake but remained silent in her mother's arms. "Hello, little princess," he said in a gentle voice. "We're going on a trip together, okay? I have some storybooks in the truck if you want to see them." Sophia looked to her mother for approval before nodding shyly. It was small but significant progress. She was starting to react positively to the presence of people, showing genuine kindness. "We need to get out of here quickly," Evelyn said, helping Marina into the truck. "Richard's men are combing the whole area, and it's only a matter of time before they expand their search to the secondary roads." Carl nodded, already starting the engine. "The way to Hope Haven is clear. I checked all possible routes this morning." He looked in the rearview mirror at Marina. "Don't worry. From now on, you and Sophia are under our protection." Zeus approached the truck window, and Sophia reached out to touch the horse's muzzle one last time. "Thank you, Zeus," she whispered, and Marina felt her heart ache at the special connection that had formed between her daughter and the animal that had saved them. "Zeus will be fine," Evelyn assured her, stroking the horse's neck. "He knows his way back to the farm, and Mr. Thompson must be worried about his disappearance." Udi! As the truck began to move, Marina looked out the back window and saw Zeus standing on the road watching them leave. There was something almost human in his eyes, as if he understood his mission was accomplished, at least for now. The road wound through open fields and small rural properties. Marina hadn't seen such open landscapes in months, and the feeling of freedom was almost intoxicating. Sophia also seemed fascinated by the view, pressing her little face against the window. To watch cows grazing and birds flying freely, Hope Haven is in a small town called Harmony Creek, Carl explained as he drove. "It's a discreet location, but with all the necessary resources. We partner with the local police department, which has officers specifically trained for domestic violence cases." "What if Richard finds us there?" Marina asked, her voice still laced with fear. "He doesn't have influence in Harmony Creek," Evelyn replied confidently. "It's a small town, but with its own independent administration. Besides, we have a very strict security protocol at Hope Haven." Carl glanced in the rearview mirror again. "Marina, I know it's hard to believe after everything you've been through, but from now on, you're not alone. We have an entire team dedicated to helping women like you rebuild their lives." "What happens now?" Marina asked, trying to process how quickly her situation was changing. "First, proper medical care for you and Sophia," Evelyn explained. "We have an excellent child psychologist who works with us, specializing in trauma. Then, we start the legal process to ensure your permanent safety." Sophia snuggled closer into her mother's arms and murmured, "Mummy, are we not going to be scared anymore?" The child's simple question touched all the adults in the truck. Marina kissed her daughter's forehead. "No, my love, we're never going to be scared again." It was a bold promise, but for the first time in months, Marina felt she might actually be able to keep it. Hope Haven wasn't what Marina had imagined. Instead of a cold, institutional building, she saw a large, welcoming house painted in pastel shades, with flower gardens and a wide porch where a few women chatted quietly. Children played in the yard, supervised by attentive adults, and the atmosphere exuded genuine peace. "Welcome to your new temporary home," Evelyn said, helping Marina and Sophia out of the truck. "Here you'll have all the time you need to recover and plan your next step." A woman of about 60 approached them, her warm smile immediately putting Marina at ease. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, the coordinator of Hope Haven," she introduced herself. "Evelyn told me about you too. I'm so glad you arrived safely." Sophia hid behind her mother, but Marina noticed she was watching the other children play with visible curiosity. It was the first real sign of interest her daughter had shown in social interaction in weeks. "Let's show you your rooms first," Mrs. Peterson said gently. "Then, when you're ready, we'll introduce you to the other residents and our team." The room assigned to them was simple but cozy, with 2 twin beds, a small sitting area with children's books and windows overlooking the garden. Sophia immediately ran to the window and watched a girl of similar age playing with dolls under a tree. "Her name is Camilla," Mrs. Peterson explained, noticing Sophia's interest. "She arrived here 2 weeks ago with her mother. Maybe you'll become friends." For the first time in a long time, Sophia smiled genuinely. "Can I play with her, Mommy?" Of course, my love," Marina replied, feeling tears of gratitude burn her eyes. "After lunch, if you want." Mrs. Peterson led Marina to a comfortable room where a young woman with curly hair and kind eyes was waiting. "This is Dr. Patricia, our psychologist," she made the introduction. "She'll be working with both of you on your recovery." "Don't worry," Dr. Patricia said, noticing Marina's hesitation. "We won't rush anything. Therapy here happens at each person's own pace. The important thing is that you feel safe." During the initial conversation, Marina gradually opened up about her experience. For the first time, she could tell her story without judgment, without someone questioning her decisions or minimizing her suffering. Dr. Patricia listened with professional attention, asking gentle questions that helped Marina process events she had tried to suppress. "What you described about Richard is a classic pattern of psychological abuse escalating to physical violence," Dr. Patricia explained. "The isolation, financial control, manipulation of perceptions, these are all deliberate tactics to break the victim's self-esteem and independence." Hearing her experience validated by a professional was liberating for Marina. For months, Richard had convinced her she was paranoid, ungrateful, incapable of understanding his good intentions. Now, finally, someone confirmed that her perception of reality was correct. Meanwhile, Sophia had cautiously joined the other children in the garden. Marina watched her from the window, seeing her daughter interact shyly with Camilla. It was a slow process, but she could see Sophia starting to relax, allowing herself to be a child again. Evelyn approached the window. "She'll recover completely," she said confidently. "Children have an incredible capacity for healing when placed in a safe and loving environment." "And what about Richard?" Marina asked, the concern still evident in her voice. "He won't just give up." "We have specialized lawyers who have already started working on your case," Evelyn explained. "Besides, your escape and the evidence of violence have opened an official investigation. This time, he won't be able to simply make everything disappear." Mrs. Peterson joined them. "Marina, I want you to know that you made the bravest possible decision. Many women never managed to take this first step. You saved not only your own life, but also Sophia's future." For the first time in months, Marina allowed herself to believe that perhaps there really was a better future waiting for them. Watching Sophia play freely in the garden, she felt something she had almost forgotten: genuine hope. 2 weeks had passed at Hope Haven when Marina received the news she both feared and expected. Dr. Patricia entered her room with a serious expression, followed by Evelyn and a woman Marina didn't recognize, an elegant lawyer in a dark suit with a determined expression. "Marina, this is Dr. Francis Owen, our lead attorney," Dr. Patricia made the introduction. "She has important news about your case." Sophia was in the garden playing with Camilla, her laughter drifting in through the open window, a sound that had become music to Marina's ears in recent days. Her daughter was flourishing at Hope Haven, talking more, smiling genuinely, and even asking questions about when they could have their own house again. "Richard has found out where you are," Dr. Owen said bluntly. "He's coming here with a team of lawyers and a temporary court order, claiming you've abducted Sophia and require psychiatric treatment." Marina's blood ran cold. Even knowing this moment might come, hearing the words spoken aloud brought back all the terror she had felt during their flight through the woods. "Can he take us back?" Not if we do our jobs right, Dr. Owen replied. With determination. We have photographic evidence of your injuries, testimonies from other women who have finally agreed to speak, and most importantly, we have Sophia. Marina didn't understand immediately. What do you mean we have Sophia? A 5-year-old child can testify in a limited capacity in cases like this, the lawyer explained gently. Of course, we won't put her in a traumatic situation, but Patricia can conduct a specialized interview that will be admissible in court. The thought of Sophia having to recall the moments of terror at the estate made Marina shudder. She's barely started to recover. I can't put her through that experience. Again, Marina, Evelyn said softly, sitting beside her. I understand your concern, but this might be the only way to protect Sophia permanently. If we don't do this now, Richard could get custody of her, and you might never see her again. The words struck Marina like a blow. The possibility of losing Sophia was worse than any physical violence she had endured. She looked out the window, watching her daughter play carefree, and made the hardest decision of her life. What do we need to do? Dr. Patricia approached. I'll talk to Sophia very carefully, using play-based techniques that are non-traumatic. She doesn't need to know she's testifying. For her, it will just be a conversation with toys and drawings. At that moment, the sound of approaching cars reached them. Marina rushed to the window and saw 3 black SUVs pulling up in front of Hope Haven. Richard Morgan emerged from the first car, dressed in an impeccable suit, accompanied by 2 lawyers and a court officer. He's here, Marina whispered, her legs feeling weak. It's okay, Dr. Owen said firmly. We have our own legal resources, and he can't just walk in here and take you. Hope Haven has the legal status of a protected shelter. Marina watched Richard approach the main entrance. Even from a distance, she could see the cold determination in his movements, the same intimidating presence that had controlled her life. For months, but something had changed. She was no longer alone, no longer isolated and helpless. Sophia ran inside, having sensed the commotion. Mommy, what's happening? Her large eyes met Marina's, and she immediately knew something was wrong. Marina knelt and hugged her daughter. Remember the bad man we ran away from? He's come to try and take us back, but we're not going to let that happen. He can't hurt us here, can he? Sophia asked, her voice small but stronger than Marina had expected. No, my love, we have people protecting us now. The doorbell rang, and Mrs. Peterson went to answer it. Through the window, Marina could see Richard speaking animatedly, gesturing with authority, clearly expecting his presence and status to be enough to get what he wanted. But this time would be different. This time, Marina had allies, evidence, and most importantly, she had found her own strength again. The main room of Hope Haven transformed into an improvised legal battlefield. Richard entered with the arrogance Marina knew well, his eyes sweeping the room with disdain, before landing on hers. For a moment, she felt the familiar fear rise in her throat, but then Sophia squeezed her hand, and Marina found strength in the need to protect her daughter. Marina, Richard said, his voice controlled, but she could detect the barely disguised fury in his eyes. You've caused a lot of worry. I've come to take you home, where you can receive the proper treatment. This is my home now, Marina replied, her voice firmer than she herself expected, and Sophia is exactly where she needs to be. Richard's lawyer stepped forward, holding out documents. We have a temporary court order based on evidence of mental instability and child abduction. Mrs. Morgan needs to come with us immediately. Dr. Owen positioned herself beside Marina, and we have evidence of systematic domestic violence, psychological coercion, and abuse of power. Furthermore, Marina is not Mrs. Morgan. They were never legally married. The statement visibly struck Richard. He had always referred to Marina as his wife, but had deliberately avoided any legal formalization that might grant her rights. "Sophia," Dr. Patricia said gently, "do you remember our special conversation with the toys?" The girl nodded, squeezing her mother's hand tighter. "Can you tell these people how you felt in the big house?" Sophia looked at Richard, and Marina saw something she never expected. Not fear, but an impressive, childish determination. "I was scared," Sophia said in a clear voice. "The man would yell at my mommy and hurt her. I would cry in my room, but I couldn't help." "The child has been coached," Richard's lawyer interrupted quickly. "She's repeating what she's been taught to say." But Sophia continued, as if the words had been dammed up for too long. "He said if I told anyone, bad things would happen. And one day I saw him push Mommy, and she fell on the floor and didn't get up for a while. The silence in the room was broken by the unexpected arrival of more people. Evelyn entered, accompanied by an elderly man with a white beard and a young man in a police uniform. "Mr. Thompson," Evelyn said, "this is the moment we've been waiting for." The elderly man approached Richard with a serious expression. "Richard Morgan, I'm Arthur Thompson, owner of Thompson Farms. I have something that belongs to you." He opened a small box and took out a gold chain. "Zeus brought this back 3 weeks ago. Do you recognize it?" Marina felt her heart race. It was the chain Richard had given her at the beginning of their relationship, the same one he had violently ripped from her neck on the night of their escape. "How could a horse?" Richard began, but his voice faltered as he realized the implications. "Zeus has a special instinct," Mr. Thompson continued calmly. "The last 3 times he's run away from my property, he's returned with evidence of women in danger. Each time, those women disappeared mysteriously from your estate." The police officer stepped forward. "Mr. Morgan, based on the testimonies collected and the physical evidence, I have an arrest warrant for you for domestic violence, false imprisonment, and coercion." Richard looked around the room like a cornered animal. His mask of respectability was finally crumbling, revealing the true nature he had hidden for so long. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. "We know exactly," Dr. Owen replied firmly. "And this time, your connections and influence won't be enough." When the handcuffs were placed on Richard, Marina felt something she hadn't experienced in months: true freedom. Sophia ran into her arms, and she hugged her daughter, knowing they were finally safe. "It's over, my love," Marina whispered in her daughter's ear. "It's finally over." For the first time since they had met, Richard Morgan did not have the last word. A year passed since that decisive day at Hope Haven. Marina stood on the porch of her new home, a small rural property she had managed to acquire with help from the Social Reintegration Program, watching Sophia play in the yard with Zeus. The majestic white horse had become a permanent part of their lives, a gift from Mr. Thompson, who insisted the animal had chosen its own family. "Zeus really did save us, didn't he, Mommy?" Sophia had asked the day the horse arrived at their new property. Now 6 years old, she spoke openly about her experience, processing the trauma through honest conversations and continued therapy with Dr. Patricia. Marina smiled, remembering her daughter's words. Sophia had blossomed into a confident, expressive child, her laughter echoing through the fields like heavenly music. The scars of the past still existed. Sometimes she woke from nightmares, sometimes she asked difficult questions about the bad man, but each day brought more light than shadow. Evelyn appeared on the road, walking towards the house for her weekly visit. She had become more than a friend. She was like an older sister, always present for important moments. "How are my favorite girls?" she called out, waving to Sophia, who ran to hug her. Aunt Evelyn, Zeus learned a new trick, Sophia exclaimed, pulling the veterinarian to see the horse, who had learned to bow when she asked. The interaction between the child and the animal was magical to behold, a connection that went beyond human understanding. Marina came down from the porch to join them. Her own transformation had been equally remarkable. The physical bruises had long since faded, but the emotional scars took longer to heal. Months of therapy, the constant support from the Hope Haven team, and primarily the determination to build a better life for Sophia had gradually strengthened her confidence. "I heard news about Richard," Evelyn said when they were alone. While Sophia played with Zeus at a safe distance, the sentence was confirmed. 5 years in prison, plus 3 years of supervised community service, and he'll have to pay financial restitution to you and the other victims who came forward. Marina nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and a strange sort of compassion. The man who had controlled her life through fear was now facing the consequences of his actions. More importantly, other women had found the courage to report similar abuses after her case gained public attention. "And the other women?" Marina asked. "Carmen was found," Evelyn replied with a smile. "She was living under an assumed identity in another state, too afraid to come back. When she heard Richard was arrested, she agreed to testify. Isabella..." Evelyn hesitated. "Isabella decided to start completely fresh in another country. She's doing well, but prefers not to maintain contact with anything related to her past." Marina understood Isabella's choice. Everyone processed trauma differently, and there was no single right way to heal. Sophia ran back to them, her hair dancing in the wind. "Mommy, Zeus wants us to ride him. Can we?" "Of course, my love," Marina replied, helping her daughter onto the horse's back before mounting behind her. It was a ritual they had developed, rides through the countryside at dusk, a time when they both felt most connected to the freedom they had won. As they rode through the open fields, Sophia asked, "Mommy, do you think we're a happy family now?" Marina hugged her daughter tighter. "Yes, my love, we are a happy, strong, and free family." The sun set on the horizon, painting the sky in golden hues, and Marina knew she had finally found her place in the world, not as someone's property, but as a strong woman who had overcome the darkness to find the light.